My sister got engaged on a Tuesday. I found out on a Thursday. Not from a phone call, not from a text, not from my mom pulling me aside to say we have news. I found out because my sister tagged our parents in an Instagram reel, champagne glasses, diamond ring close-up, my dad crying happy tears, and the algorithm served it to me like a pizza delivery I never ordered. I sat in my car in the parking garage at work, phone in my hand, watching the reel loop 3 times before it registered that I was watching my own family celebrate the biggest moment of my sister's life without telling me it was happening. The caption said, "Surrounded by everyone who loves me most." There were 37 people in that restaurant. I was not one of them. My name is Claire Mercer. I'm 31 years old. I've been a senior data engineer at a fintech startup in Austin for 4 years, and I am, by every measurable standard, doing well. I own my condo. I max out my 401k. I have a savings account my financial advisor describes as impressively boring for someone your age, which is the highest compliment I've ever received from a man in a blazer. My family describes me differently. They describe me as reliable, as practical, as the one who doesn't need much. What they mean, though they'd never say it out loud, is that I am not my sister. My sister, Brooke, is 27, and has been described by my parents since approximately the 3rd grade as gifted, sensitive, and full of light. She studied fine arts in college. My parents paid every dime, dropped out a semester before graduation to pursue her ceramics business, and has spent the last 4 years being financially, emotionally, and logistically supported by our parents in ways that were never discussed at the dinner table, at least not with me present. Her ceramics business sells roughly 3 pieces per quarter. Her Instagram has 60,000 followers. My parents talk about her like she's a cross between Georgia O'Keeffe and a baby bird that will die if you stop cradling it. I drove home from work that Thursday night, poured myself a glass of water instead of the wine I wanted, and stared at my kitchen wall. There was a very specific feeling sitting in my chest, something I'd learned to recognize over years of being the daughter who didn't get the phone call. It wasn't quite sadness. It was more like the sensation of reaching for a light switch in a room you've lived in your whole life and finding nothing but wall. I texted my mom. "Hey." Saw Brooke's post. Congratulations to her. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "Oh, sweetheart, it was so last minute. We'll celebrate all together soon." I put my phone face down on the counter and did not pick it up again that night. Here's what I want you to understand before I tell you the rest of this. I was not looking for a fight. I was not nursing some ancient grudge, looking for an excuse to burn everything down. I had spent the better part of a decade making my peace with being the second daughter, the background character, the one who lands on her feet while Brooke is being caught mid-fall. I had a therapist. I had a good life. I had, genuinely, moved on from most of it. What I hadn't done was look closely at the numbers. 6 weeks after the engagement Instagram reel, my company got acquired. Not a small acquisition, a real one, the kind that comes with lawyers and press releases and, for senior engineers with early equity, a payout that reorients your understanding of your own bank account. I won't give you the exact number. I'll just say that, when the wire hit, I sat at my desk with my hands very still on my keyboard for about 4 minutes before I could move again. That afternoon, I did something I'd been thinking about for 2 years but never pulled the trigger on. I went to a dealership and I bought a car. Not the practical, sensible sedan I'd driven since my mid-20s. I walked out with an $89,000 BMW 7 Series in Alpine White, paid in full, no financing, no cosigner, no one's name on the paperwork but mine. I wasn't thinking about my parents when I bought it. I want to be honest about that. I was thinking about the fact that I had earned something significant and I was allowed to enjoy it. I was thinking about being 24 and eating rice and frozen vegetables for a week because I'd over-budgeted on a student loan payment while my sister was taking a pottery workshop in New Mexico on my parents' dock. Credit card. I was thinking that I had spent so many years making myself small and careful and impressive for someone your age that I had almost forgotten I was allowed to take up space. I drove it home with the windows down, music too loud, and I felt something close to joy. My dad found out the way he finds out most things about my life. Accidentally, through a system I'd forgotten he had access to. Years ago, when I got my first car at 22, my dad had set himself up as a secondary contact on my insurance. I'd never removed him. When my policy updated to reflect the new vehicle year, make, model, and estimated value, the notification went to both of us. He called me on a Sunday morning, and unlike the last time my family had surprising news, I actually picked up. Claire. No, hello. Just my name, like a statement of fact. I got an insurance notification. An $89,000 BMW. Yeah, I said. I bought a car. With what money? And there it was. Not congratulations. Not are you doing okay? The immediate, reflexive assumption that the only way I could have something nice was if something had gone wrong. With money I earned, I said. My company was acquired. I had equity. I used it. There was a pause. Then, in a tone I recognized as my dad's version of controlled panic. We need to talk about this as a family. Come to dinner next Saturday. Everyone's going to be there. He said everyone the way parents say it when they mean you don't have a choice. I thought about saying no. I thought about telling him I didn't owe anyone an explanation for a financial decision made entirely with my own money. Instead, I said sure and hung up, because some part of me already knew that dinner wasn't really going to be about the car. I had about 5 days between that phone call and dinner. I spent the first 2 of them not thinking about it, going to the gym, answering work emails, living my life. On the 3rd day, I was cleaning out my home office, something I only do when I'm anxious and pretending not to be, and I opened my laptop to clear some old files. I still had access to our family's shared cloud storage. My dad had set it up years ago to share photos and documents between devices, and like the insurance notification, nobody had ever thought to remove me. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was clicking through folders the way you do when you're procrastinating, half present, half somewhere else. Then I saw a folder labeled Brooke, Support, and something in my body went still before my brain caught up. I opened it. What I found inside took me about 40 minutes to read through completely. PDFs of bank statements, transfer confirmations, a document from an attorney outlining the disbursement of my maternal grandmother's estate. My grandmother had passed 4 years ago. I remembered the funeral. I remembered my mom crying in the car on the way home. What I did not remember, because nobody had told me, was that my grandmother had left a sum of money designated for both of her granddaughters, with a specific note in the will that it was to be used for education, professional development, or establishing financial independence. There was a document in that folder, showing my share of the inheritance had been redirected, that was the word the attorney had used in his letter. Redirected into a fund my parents had opened in Brooke's name. The letter cited a consent clause, and listed my parents as having authority to make that call. It did not mention that I was never asked. It did not mention that at the time this happened, I had been 27, a legal adult, someone who could have been consulted. The total amount redirected was $64,000. I closed the laptop. I got up and walked to my kitchen and stood at the sink running cold water over my wrists the way my therapist taught me when my nervous system gets ahead of me. I stood there for a long time. Then I went back to the laptop. I kept reading. The next folder was labeled MISC. B. Projects. Inside were screenshots of Venmo transfers, wire confirmations, a lease agreement. That lease agreement was for Brooke's studio space, a converted loft in East Austin she'd rented for the past 2 years, the one she photographed constantly for her Instagram, the one my parents had mentioned once in passing as something they'd helped her set up. The lease agreement had a guarantor line. The guarantor was not my mother. The guarantor was not my father. It was me. My name. My date of birth. My social security number, which my parents had on file from years ago when they'd helped me open my first bank account as a teenager. My signature, which was not my signature, which was a typed approximation of my signature in a font someone had selected from a drop-down menu. My hands started shaking. I called my best friend, Maya, who answered on the second ring. Because Maya is the kind of person who answers on the second ring, even when she's in the middle of something. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Claire, she said finally, you need to call a lawyer before you go to that dinner. I did. I called one the next morning. We had an hour-long consultation where I laid out what I'd found, and by the end, she had used the phrase fraudulent use of identity twice and civil action once, in a tone that was measured and careful, and made the floor feel slightly unstable beneath my feet. I asked her what my options were. She laid them out. I thanked her. I went home and sat with the folder printed on my kitchen table: transfers, the estate document, the lease agreement, the consent form my parents had signed on my behalf without my knowledge, and I looked at all of it, arranged in a neat stack, and I thought about my grandmother. I thought about her telling me once, when I was maybe 12, that she was proud of how steady I was, how she said it like a compliment, how I had spent the next 20 years trying to be the steadiest version of myself possible, not realizing that my steadiness had been treated like a resource other people were allowed to tap. I thought about Brooke's engagement dinner, the one I found out about through an algorithm. I thought about every time my parents had referenced Brooke's sensitivities as a reason she needed more, and my practicality as a reason I needed less, and how those two things together had quietly, over many years, added up to $64,000 and a lease I'd never signed. I reorganized the folder, added dividers, made a second copy, and then I got in my BMW and drove to dinner. My parents live in a suburb north of Austin, about 40 minutes from my condo. It's a neighborhood with wide streets and mature oak trees and houses that all look slightly like the same house, which my mom has always found comforting, and I have always found subtly disorienting. I pulled into the driveway at 6:58, parking behind Brooke's car, a Jeep my parents had put a down payment on 2 years ago, as a little gift. My mom opened the door before I knocked. Her eyes went immediately to the BMW in the driveway, then back to my face. "That's the car," she said, like she was confirming a rumor. "That's the car," I agreed. She looked at it for another moment, something complicated moving across her face. Then she stepped back to let me in. Brooke was on the couch with her fiancé, a guy named Derek who seems genuinely nice and is therefore, in my assessment, slightly too good for this family's track record. He stood up when I came in and shook my hand with actual warmth, which I appreciated. Brooke gave me a hug that lasted approximately 1 second and said "cute dress" in a tone that suggested she was commenting on the weather. My dad was in the kitchen. He came out when he heard my voice, and for a moment we just looked at each other. He looked older than I remembered from Christmas. Or maybe I was just looking more carefully. "Glad you came," he said. "Of course," I said. We sat down to dinner. My mom had made the pot roast she makes for family events, the one that takes all day and is objectively delicious and functions as a kind of emotional buffer. It's very hard to have a serious conflict when there's pot roast. I think she does this intentionally. We talked about Derek's job, about the wedding timeline, about a trip my parents were considering to see my dad's brother in Colorado. It was so normal that for about 20 minutes, I almost forgot why I was there. Then my dad set down his fork and looked at me. "So," he said. The car, I said. "Claire, an $89,000 purchase that's not a small thing. We want to understand where you're at financially. Whether you made this decision with a clear head or whether..." "Whether what?" I said. He paused. "Whether you're being impulsive. Whether there's something going on we don't know about." My mom nodded. "We just worry. That kind of money is mine," I said. "I earned it. My company was acquired. I had equity that vested. I used part of it to buy something I wanted and could comfortably afford." Brooke, who had been very focused on her pot roast, looked up. "How much equity?" she asked, in a tone that was trying to be casual. "Enough," I said. There was a shift in the room then. I could feel it. The dinner party version of this conversation was ending and something else was beginning. I put my fork down. I reached into the bag I'd set beside my chair. I placed the folder on the table, closed, and rested my hand on top of it. My dad looked at it. "What is that?" "It's a conversation I should have had a long time ago," I said. "But I didn't have all the information then. I do now." I opened the folder and slid the first document across the table. The estate disbursement letter. My grandmother's name at the top. The phrase redirected in the third paragraph. My dad picked it up slowly. My mom leaned over to read it. The sound of Derek carefully setting down his own fork was very loud in the sudden quiet. "Where did you get this?" my dad asked. "The shared family cloud," I said. "The one I set up in 2015. Neither of you ever removed my access." My mom made a sound that was not quite a word. Brooke had put her fork down now, too. You need to understand, my dad started, that at the time, your sister was struggling, I said. I know, you've said that, but I need you to tell me something. When you made this decision, when you redirected $64,000 that my grandmother left for both of us, did you tell me? He didn't answer. Did you ask me? Still nothing. Did you even consider asking me? My mom said, very quietly, we thought you were settled. You had your job, you were doing so well. Brooke was in a difficult place. She needed the foundation. I was 27, I said. I was eating cheap to pay off student loans while working 60-hour weeks. I was doing well because I had no other option. I didn't have a foundation. I was building one from scratch. And while I was doing that, you took the one that was supposed to be mine and gave it to her. Brooke pushed back from the table slightly. Claire, come on. I didn't know about the specifics. Brooke, I said, and my voice came out very even, which surprised even me. I'm not blaming you for decisions our parents made, but I need you to hear this too. I pulled out the second document, the lease agreement. I placed it in front of my dad. I spoke to a lawyer, I said. Using someone's identifying information to sign a legal document without their knowledge or consent is fraud. I need you to understand that I have options I have chosen not to pursue yet. My dad's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. He picked up the lease. His jaw tightened. That was we were in a bind, he said. Your credit was the strongest. Brooke needed the studio space, or she was going to lose the lease opportunity. We thought. You thought you could use my name without asking me, I said. And if the landlord had ever come after the guarantor, they would have come after me. For a contract I didn't know existed. Derek, to his enormous credit, said nothing. He had the expression of someone who was deeply committed to remaining neutral and was working very hard at it. My mom had started crying, which was not unexpected. She cried when things got hard in the same way other people went quiet reflexively, immediately, as if the tears could function as a pause button on a conversation she didn't want to finish. I had learned, over years, to stay steady when that happened, to keep my voice level, to not let the tears be the end of the sentence. Mom, I said gently, I need you to stay with me here. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because I found out that my family has been making decisions about my money and my identity without my knowledge for years, and I need to talk about it. We never meant to hurt you, she said. We were managing a lot. Your father's job, the house, Brooks. I know, I said. You were managing a lot. But when you needed to make things work, you didn't cut back on what you were giving Brooke. You took what was designated for me. And I have spent 4 years not knowing that. Building a life under the assumption that I got here on my own, when actually someone else spent what should have been my starting point. My dad set the lease agreement down. He looked at me for a long moment, and I watched him making some internal calculation, deciding which version of this conversation to enter. He chose the wrong one. Claire, we kept this family afloat, he said, his voice shifting into something firmer. You have no idea the pressure we were under. Your sister had real needs. And I didn't? You were capable. He said it like it was a compliment. Like capability was a reason to be overlooked. You always figured it out. Brooke doesn't have the same. Say it, I said. Say what you've never said out loud. She doesn't have the same what? He stopped. Because here's what I've been hearing my whole life in versions of that sentence, I continued. She doesn't have the same resilience. She doesn't have the same practicality. She doesn't have the same ability to survive without help, and every single time you said it, the invisible second half was, so we gave her what was yours, and you'll be fine, because you always are. Brooke looked at the table. I'd expected her to push back harder. Instead, she looked like someone who had been waiting for this sentence to be said out loud for a long time and wasn't sure what to do now that it had been. We love you both equally, my mom said, in a thin voice. I know you believe that, I said. I'm not telling you that you don't love me. I'm telling you that love isn't the same as equity. And the fact that I've never asked for anything doesn't mean it was okay to take without asking. I pulled the last document from the folder, the summary my lawyer had helped me draft. A breakdown of the estate redirection, the lease liability, and 2 additional transfers I'd found in the statements that traced back to accounts in my name. a minor savings account from my childhood that had been closed without my knowledge at 24. Its balance transferred out in 2 increments. Total, across everything, slightly over $78,000. I placed the summary on the table. My dad looked at it. He didn't pick it up. "I'm not going to sue you," I said. "I want you to hear that. That is a choice I am making, not because I don't have grounds, but because I don't want to spend the next 2 years in a courtroom with my own parents. I am not here to destroy this family. I'm here to tell you that what happened was wrong, and it needs to be acknowledged, and it needs to be made right." "Claire," my dad said slowly, "we don't have that kind of money available. We have a mortgage, we have." "You have investments," I said. "I know, because I have access to the same cloud where you store your financial documents. I'm not asking for everything at once. I'm asking for a repayment plan, in writing, and I'm asking for something you can't put a number on." "What's that?" my mom asked quietly. "I want you to stop treating Brooke like she needs to be caught, and me like I can be used as a landing pad. I want you to tell her and to mean it that it's time for her to build her own foundation, not because I'm angry at her, because she deserves to know she's capable of it, and you've never let her find out." The room was very quiet. Outside, a neighbor's lawnmower started up, muffled and distant, aggressively ordinary. Brooke looked up at that last part. Something moved across her face that I hadn't expected. Not anger, something more like recognition. "I didn't know about the money," she said again. "I knew they helped me. I didn't know how." "I believe you," I said. And I did. That was the thing about golden children, they often didn't know the full cost of what they were receiving. They just knew they were safe, and that safety had always been there, and they had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the hum of an air conditioner. "But now you know." She nodded. Once, very slowly. My dad rubbed his face with both hands. He looked like a man who had arrived at a place he'd been avoiding for a long time and was now standing in it and realizing there was nowhere left to walk away to. "We'll need time," he said, "to figure out the finances." "Take the time you need," I said. "But understand that until we have a written plan, some things are going to change. I've already updated my insurance. You no longer receive notifications about my accounts or my property. I've removed any of my identifying information from documents I've found, and I've flagged my credit with the Bureau, and I'm stepping back." I paused. Not permanently. Not by choice. But because I need to stop being available as a resource before you've learned I'm not one. My mom's voice cracked. "You're not going to come to the wedding?" "I didn't say that," I said, as gently as I could. "I said I'm stepping back. A wedding is months away. Where we are then depends on the choices you make between now and there." I stood up. I picked up my folder. Derek stood too, reflexively, and then seemed uncertain why he'd done it. I almost liked him more for that. "Dinner was good," I said. "It really was. You've always made the best pot roast." My mom laughed, slightly hysterically. It broke some of the tension, which I think she needed. I walked out. The evening air was warm and smelled like cut grass from the neighbor's lawnmower. The BMW sat in the driveway, gleaming white under the streetlights, completely unbothered by everything that had happened in the past hour. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment without starting the engine, hands on the wheel, heart going faster than I wanted it to. I wasn't sure what I felt. I had expected to feel the way you feel after a difficult conversation you've been rehearsing. Drained, relieved, a little empty. Instead, I felt something I didn't have a word for at first. It took me the whole drive home to identify it. It was the feeling of having been seen, not by my parents, not yet, but by myself. Of having said, out loud, in a room full of people who had spent years deciding what I needed and didn't need on my behalf. This is what actually happened, and it matters, and I am not going to pretend it doesn't. My therapist would probably call that integration. I called it arriving somewhere I'd been driving toward for a long time. The weeks after that dinner were not a montage of healing. There were no tearful phone calls where everything was resolved. My mom texted me things that started with, "I've been thinking," and contained a lot of, "we never intended," and "not quite enough, we were wrong." My dad didn't text at all for the first 2 weeks, which was actually more honest. He was processing, and he processed by going silent, and I respected that even when it was uncomfortable. Brooke called me 3 weeks later. I almost didn't answer, and then I did, and I was glad. She told me she'd had a long conversation with our parents the week after dinner, that she'd asked them directly how they'd been supporting her and for how long and where the money had come from. That, hearing it, laid out specifically, for the first time, had made her feel sick in a way she was still working through. She said she'd been in therapy twice since then, which was not the punchline, but the actual thing she was trying to figure out who she was when the support structure was examined honestly, rather than taken for granted. I don't know how to feel about all of it yet, she told me. That's okay, I said. You don't have to know yet. Are you okay? Yeah, I said. I actually am. My dad called on a Sunday about 6 weeks after the dinner. He started the conversation by clearing his throat 3 times, which is his tell for when he's about to say something that costs him. He told me they'd spoken to a financial advisor, that they were planning to liquidate some investments and set up a repayment schedule, that it would take time, but they had committed to a number and a timeline, and he would send the written plan to me by end of week. He did send it, end of week, as promised. In the middle of the call, before we hung up, he said something I hadn't expected. Your grandmother would have been proud of you, he said. Not because of the car, because you kept your head and said your piece without making it a war. I held the phone against my ear for a moment without answering. The thing about parents is that even when they've hurt you, they can sometimes still say the exact sentence that gets you. Not because you need their approval, I'd spent years outgrowing that particular need, but because underneath everything, they knew you before you knew yourself. And when they see you clearly, even once, it registers somewhere that doesn't follow logic. Thank you, I said. That means something. I want to tell you something. And I want you to hear it past the car, past the money, past the satisfying story architecture of receipts on a coffee table and a folder with dividers. What actually happened in that house wasn't revenge. Revenge would have meant hiring the lawyer and going to court and watching my parents scramble. Revenge would have felt clean and bright and finished. What this felt like was messier and realer than that. It felt like a conversation that was 20 years overdue, sitting in a room that smelled like pot roast, with a sister who was learning something painful about herself at the same time I was, and parents who were capable of being wrong and also capable of trying to do better. None of that is tidy. None of it wrapped up the way a story is supposed to wrap up. My mom still sometimes defaults to, "We worry about you," which is her way of hovering without admitting she's hovering. My sister is doing the slow, uncomfortable work of figuring out who she is without a financial safety net. Some days she's better at it than others. My dad and I talk on the phone every few weeks. It's different than it was, more careful, less comfortable, in a way that is somehow more honest. The BMW is parked in my building's garage. I drive it on weekdays and Sundays and sometimes in the evenings when I want to think. It doesn't feel like a statement anymore. It just feels like my car. The one I bought with my own money, in my own name, with no one's approval required. If you've spent your life being the capable one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't need much, I want you to hear this. Your stability is not permission. Your ability to survive without help is not evidence that you don't deserve it. And the fact that you landed on your feet does not retroactively make it okay for someone to pull the floor out from under you while you were building. You're allowed to ask where the money went. You're allowed to say this wasn't okay. You're allowed to buy the car, or take the trip, or say no to the family meeting, or walk out the front door and sit in your driver's seat for a minute before you start the engine. Just breathing, just yours. I want to know, have you ever been the reliable one, the practical one, the one your family took for granted because you were too steady to seem like you needed anything? Tell me in the comments. And tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels.